Good afternoon, Council. May I have a mover and seconder to call the meeting to order, please? Deputy Cabral and Councillor Garwood, the special meeting of the Council of the Township of Springwater of May 1st, 2024 come to order at 4:30 p.m. All those in favor? That has carried. Councillor, are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest? Not seeing any. We will move right into our presentation. I will now call upon Jack Amendolia and Dr. Robert Williams for the Watson and Associates presentation.
Thank you. Am I good to go? Great. Thank you to the mayor. Thanks for council for having us here tonight. So really tonight is really hopefully a pretty informal meeting, a bit of a workshop and a discussion to introduce council. Obviously, you're aware that you're conducting a council composition and ward boundary review. So we just wanted to introduce a little bit about our process, a chance for us to meet you, vice versa, a chance for you to meet the project team a little bit, talk a little bit about, ultimately what we think collectively we want the outcome of this project to be. And really another main thing that we want to get through tonight is the next steps that we'll talk a little bit about more this evening is going to be an interview with individually one-on-one that Dr. Williams is going to conduct with you. So we thought tonight also it's just a little bit of a prep for that interview so that if concepts come up, if, Dr. Williams starts to talk about certain guiding principles or what have you, hopefully tonight we can suss some of those things out so that it just makes that interview a little bit more efficient and we can provide some decent feedback as a part of it. So to get started, like was just mentioned, my name's Jack Amendolia. I'm a managing partner at Watson and Associates. My firm works all over Ontario for municipalities like yours, for school boards. We do a lot of municipal finance, school board finance, projections, and the projection part is a big part of what we bring to this analysis because we need to understand how growth is occurring, where it's occurring in your township from ward to ward, and also where it's going to occur. Because we also don't want to do a ward boundary that lasts you for one election. Ideally, the intention is to last for at least a couple of elections, trying to recognize again how the municipality is going to grow and where it's going to grow. I'm joined tonight, like was mentioned, by Dr. Robert Williams. I'll let Dr. Williams introduce himself, but I'll do a quick introduction. We do these projects together. Like I said, Watson focuses a lot on the growth and technical aspect of these studies. Dr. Williams, in his experience as a public affairs consultant, expert in municipal governance, brings obviously that municipal lens to these studies. Bob, I don't know if you want to add anything else to that.
Okay, thank you. We'll drop the titles after this, please. I don't need to worry about that. I spent many years as a faculty member at the University of Waterloo, took early retirement and have ended up with a second career, namely working on my own in a few cases, but mostly with Watson over the last number of years. And together the team has done, I keep losing track. Are we at 30? I think something like that, quite a number of them anyway. So we're very happy to have a chance to get to know another part of Ontario, another part of Simcoe County, where we've done a number of these reviews. And as Jack said, one of my first roles will be to talk to each of you individually about some of the things that you may want to see come out of this review and to help us understand your community better as outsiders. By definition, we need to know about your community and the operation of your representative system. So that'll be what I bring to this, and I look forward to meeting you all independently later on.
Thanks, Bob. We can move a couple of slides ahead. One more. Thank you. So I mentioned just a second ago, part of the theme, I guess, of this presentation, as well as when Bob starts to speak to you individually, is there's going to be some questions that we're ultimately trying to answer as part of this review. So I just wanted to start tonight's presentation by outlining some of those questions. So as we speak tonight, hopefully council can kind of keep those at the top of their mind, and maybe some questions or discussion points result from some of those questions. So some of these are, like I said, what Bob is going to be asking you in those interviews. It's also a lot of the feedback that we try to get once we go out to the public in terms of engagement, website materials, is really this first phase is like Bob just mentioned, trying to understand where we're working, trying to understand Springwater, trying to understand the different pushes and pulls that occur with council, what's really working well, and perhaps what needs maybe some consideration. So the first question we ask is, how does the present electoral arrangement for the township of Springwater measure up? Big question, right? With lots of different facets and can be very complicated, but that's ultimately what we're trying to understand in this first phase is how does the system currently work? Because in some places we do a review and the system works great. And maybe, and Bob will talk a little bit more about this, but maybe it's just a tweak or two that's necessary. In some places we work and the system, counselors telling us very clearly there are things that are broken that we need to fix, right? So that's kind of the first question that we think about. Next, we think about, do the current ward boundaries that you have, are they achieving fair representation, right? And that can mean a couple of different things as well. But I like to think about it in terms of accessibility and workload, right? So accessibility, can your constituents reach you, right? Do they have to wait weeks and weeks because the population of the ward is so large that you have so many issues to deal with that it's hard to get access to their counselor. And that's something that we want to hear about and something we want to look at. Same thing, and very relatable, right? From a counselor perspective, is it difficult for them to do their daily duties? Are they sitting on too many committees? These are the kind of things that Bob is going to try to suss out to understand kind of what does your day-to-day look like, and are there things from a ward boundary perspective that can fix it? The other question is, ultimately, what do we want as an outcome, right? Because a lot of times I think the focus happens to be on an election day exercise. But for us, I mean, and and talking to your clerk, I think would agree that it's really the day after the election and for the 4 years after that we're talking about. It's easy to get lost in that we're just kind of moving lines and trying to balance some populations. And while that's, a big part of it, population, representation by population, there's other things that we're going to get into as well. So that's, kind of what we're getting at is ultimately, like, what should the outcome of the successful ward boundary review be? And this last one is really important. And ultimately, what do you need from us and what do you need from staff? What do you need to see or hear from the public to make a decision? Because as much as we, want to have really good public engagement, as much as we want to try to provide you with good recommendations and options, this is a council decision. So everything that we're doing, we're trying to do to prepare and inform you so that you're able to make that decision or decide that a decision isn't necessary. So we want you to be clear with us and your staff as we work through this process. What types of things do you want to see? I don't, to be careful, not, drawing lines for us because we don't want to get into any gerrymandering or anything like that. But it's more than that. It's more about, again, the outcomes and ultimately, some of the obvious things we talked about today. I want better accessibility. I want a more equitable workload amongst council. Those types of things are ultimately what we're trying to get in this first phase. So I'm going to move on to the next slide. Pass things over to Bob in a minute, but this really just summarizes, I think, some of the things I already spoke about, why we're undertaking a review. There's every review we do, there's definitely some unique ones, but there's similarities in all of them. And a couple of similarities are a lot of places were created because of amalgamation, and a lot of wards were created from former villages or municipalities that were amalgamated. And a lot of times it hasn't been looked at in 25, 30 plus years. So that's a lot of times why we undertake a review is just because it's time, just like every other system or service that you provide. But the really big one nowadays is, what we've already alluded to. It's change. It's population growth. Places don't look the same that they did, never mind 20 years ago, but even 5, 6, 7 years ago with, the changes in housing affordability, with the migration as a result of the pandemic, growth in Simcoe County, one of the fastest growing places in Ontario. Springwater, we'll look at this in a little bit, but astronomical growth, and it's going to continue. So I think the reasons of why we're doing a review hopefully should be pretty clear based on some of the things we spoke about tonight. And really quickly, I mean, when we talk about objectives, I don't want to belabor this point because I think I've already talked about it quite a bit so far tonight. But I mean, there's the main ones, right? Ultimately, we want fair representation, and that's going to, you know, be a population exercise, right? We want to start there and ensure that there is, you know, somewhat equitable population amongst the various wards. I talked about population and demographic changes, so we want to incorporate not only what's happened, but try to forecast and incorporate what's about to happen. And ultimately, with the intention is that it's going to be a better system for council. It's going to be a better system for your constituents. So I'll stop there for a bit, and Bob's going to spend a little bit of time going through what your existing system looks like, talk a little bit about the legislation or really lack thereof when we talk about ward boundary reviews. And then I'll finish off in a little bit and get into some of the population metrics I spoke about.
All right, thank you, Jack. Obviously, on the screen is a map that shows the current wards that were put together about 10 years ago, roughly. They were the second set of wards that I understand from when the municipality was created. You went from 7 to 5 wards and ended up with this particular map, quite different areas covered and some striking features, at least to me. The lines themselves are striking. How did they end up that way? We won't get into that right away, but it is a curious question, and there may be valid reasons for that. And the question is, do they still matter? Is that still the right way to capture? But again, I'm getting ahead of myself. But we know that the wards are composed of clusters of areas, a lot of rural territory, obviously, of various kinds. One of the reasons I'm late is that I was doing a bit of a tour around this afternoon. And I know that the communities within each of the wards have their own flavor, their own history, their own identity. That becomes an important part of some of the principles we look at. And one of the things we need to do is make sure that the groupings of those communities are still plausible, still make sense, and contribute, as Jack said, to the overall goal of what's referred to as effective representation. And we'll explain some of that in a moment. Now, the next slide basically gives us the framework for all of this. Acting to review a ward system is something that is within the authority of the municipality, but there are certain limitations on all of that. As we've tried to capture here in a summary form, the Municipal Act authorizes a lower tier municipality like Springwater to do basically 3 things. It can change the size of its council. As long as you've got a minimum of 5 members, that's as small as you can get. You can have as many as you want. There are no rules, no principles, no guidelines, no anything. And as we see in some of the other information that we've collected, the number within Simcoe County is relatively similar, 7, 9, I think there's a couple of 10s. They're fairly similar. You move outside the county and they're all over the place. So the province just says you can change the size of your council. As long as you've got 5, that's all that matters. One of those, though, is the head of council. So a head of council and a minimum of 4 others. And I think Tiny and Tay both have that sign. Anyway, that's one authority, but that decision is not open to appeal. If you pass a bylaw to say at the next election, our council is going to be 17, nobody can appeal that. That's your authority to make that decision. Being a bit frivolous, but you know the point. You make the choice and you can decide to keep it the way it is. The second authority within the act is that you can determine how the council is elected, except for the head of council, which in Ontario, that person must be elected in a general vote or an at-large system. The other members of council can be elected as the legislation says by general vote, that is at large, by wards, or by some combination of the two. That gets a bit messy, but that is within your authority to do, to change the way members of council are elected. That decision is also not appealable. If you were to make a decision to come up with a new way, instead of having each of the ward councilors elected in wards or in wards electing one person, you have the authority to make that decision and it can't be appealed. The third one is the authority to divide or redivide the municipality into wards or dissolve the existing wards. So that's the generic phrase. If you've got no wards, you can add wards. If you've got wards, you can have no wards, or you can reorganize the wards you've got. That's what we're talking about here. Reorganize or redivide the municipality into wards. Spell check doesn't like to redivide, but that's in the legislation. You can redivide the municipality, and that's what we're looking at. In contrast to the other two, a bylaw under that provision is open to appeal. And so any member of the community, any member of council, I suppose, in an unfortunate situation, but any member of the community, one person could appeal that bylaw, and the OLT would be required to examine the bylaw and determine whether it should stand or not. Clearly, and that's part of Jack's point earlier about what you need to know and how we do it. The more confidence you have in the decision you make, the easier it would be to withstand an appeal. Our goal is to try to make sure that no appeal is needed, that the community is happy enough with that the process was fair, the process is plausible, the result is sustainable, that they don't feel they need to appeal that. But it is an authority that is there, and that's virtually as far as it goes in terms of legislation. Sorry, I missed half the slide. That side, the left side of the slide, basically is something that happens at the discretion of council. As Jack suggested earlier, you don't have to do it on any timetable. You don't have to do it at all. And there are municipalities that decide that what they've got is perfectly all right. Let's just leave it. The right side is reminding you that there are certain other parts of a municipal election that are standardized. The date. Every municipality in Ontario holds the election on the same date for a 4-year term. The eligibility to serve, to become a candidate or to serve in the office is standard across the province. And how the ballots are collected and counted is still a standard practice. You can do phone in and mail in and live, but how you count them, namely the plurality system, is what happens everywhere. So you can't touch any of those things, but we can look at the things on the left side of the screen. Okay, award boundary review. Jack earlier alluded to the idea of paying some attention to population, and we'll see that that is at the top of the list. But one of the things that makes this a more challenging exercise is that it's not just about numbers. It's not just about what the population of Springwater is in 2024. It's important, but it's not the only thing. So we have, over the course of our collaboration and in other studies that I'm aware of, have worked with some guiding principles, as we call them, and they're found there on the screen, 5 of them. Representation by population is the usual consideration in a review. It's part of the idea of equity, treating people fairly. Sometimes referred to as parity, words that are parallel or very close to one another. We know we can never be exactly equal, but we try to even them out. And so a similar number of people living in them, that's a key word too. It's not electors, it's residents, because some of the people you represent are not old enough to vote, or may not be eligible to vote for some other reason, but they live here, they use your services, they pay your taxes. Anyway, it's about people, not just electors. The second point, again, we talked about it earlier, population and electoral trends. I'll make the point that I've often used when we know we've had reviews, electoral reviews, say at the federal level, that's driven by the census. So every 10 years, once a census is held, the Federal Redistribution Act requires a review of the parliamentary constituencies to aim for parity so you catch up. So if the census was in 2011, by 2021, you draw boundaries to catch up to where you were. And then the next one will catch up again. At the municipal level, again, because there are no rules from the province, and thinking of budgets and other issues of trying to manage elections, we try to do an election thinking ahead. Because in effect, you know, in 2 weeks, if we're to pass a boundary bylaw today, within 2 weeks, your population will have changed anyway, probably, or 2 months or 2 years, anyway. So we think ahead. So it's about considering expected changes so the ward sizes will be balanced for up to 3 terms of council. And again, not to pat Jack on the back too much here, but the Watson team is there primarily to assist in that because of the role they have in understanding current demographics and growth. And we can speak to that a little later on. So that is what we also try to look into in designing wards. Where is the growth going to happen? What are the changes that we can expect? And draw lines that try to address that. Now, you can immediately see that sometimes meeting the first principle and the second principle may not end up with the same map. And that's partly what we're going to come to a little later. The third one, geographical and topographical features as boundaries. Ideally, the boundaries should be ones that are easily identifiable. Hence my little joke about Floss Line 5 and other places. They should be lines that people can understand. We know that 98% of the population wouldn't say, oh yeah, I just went from Ward 5 to Ward 4. They don't think that way, but on a map, it's important to be able to say that is a ward that is confined by an area that we can identify. And other geographical features might come into play. I don't see them in your current lines, but there are many municipalities that might use a river valley or a railroad track or a Hamilton in the mountain, things like that. We would take that into account. Can't say that there'll be things there right away, but we would look into that. Community and diversity of interests, I've also just referred to a few minutes ago. We know there are distinctive communities within Springwater. They are communities drawn around agriculture, tourism, other kinds of interests. There are settlement areas that have their own history, as I said, and we try to draw the lines around those areas. What are those areas as part of our investigation? How do people in Elmvale understand Elmvale? How far does Elmvale go? How much is the old identity with Floss still present? How much of the community is something that could be open to change? We don't know that. But again, we add that into our review. And then the final one, the means of communication and accessibility, a bit like the geographic and topographical features, but what places relate to each other? Where are the bus routes? Where are the other connections that place one community with having some affinity with another, but not some others? Maybe a little harder to pin down. The point, though, is that when we move away from just straight population and factor in these others, it becomes a more complicated process and one it's a bit harder perhaps to come down with a definitive answer, which is why, again, I hope I'm not jumping ahead. Normally at the end of the process, we come back with more than one option because different options will be better meeting some of these principles than others. And again, we're jumping ahead a little bit, but what we look at is how we blend them together and what mix we add to create something that leads to the overall goal of effective representation, which is a principle that is not listed there because it is the result of the way we blend all those others together. Are you as a resident treated fairly? Do you have a chance to be heard? And does your voice contribute to a decision in a way that's fair in the context of other residents of the community? So the overriding principle is effective representation. Okay. The next slide, I am doing this one, right? Okay. Changing communities. And that, again, we've alluded to that already. Your community is changing. It is growing. The areas that are where there's a concentration may not be the ones that were largest in when the municipality was created. I haven't seen those numbers, so we don't quite know how that will play out. But municipalities have to navigate that growth, the shifting demographics in terms of incomers, in terms of community needs. That's all got to be part of why a review is needed to bring that up to date. Outdated electoral arrangements may lead to unequal representation and make it challenging for elected officials to serve to best serve the varied and changing needs of the communities. And we may discover, again, Jack's alluded to that, we may discover that having done all of this and looked at these factors, things are pretty good at Springwater. Maybe we only need to make a couple of little changes if we desire to get perhaps closer to one of these principles. And I think that's what happened in a couple of instances in the past. Some small changes were made, but we didn't have to do the whole structure. But we don't know that yet, and that's partly what I will need to find out, and the community will help us that, and you individually will help me understand that. So where we come to this is that we believe that it's a standard practice, for example, to review your services, the services that are considered necessary and desirable. I think that's in the Municipal Act somewhere. You review those regularly. You make sure that your fire services or your other services related to keeping the municipality safe in other ways. You do that regularly, and you make changes to your organizational structures as you identify some issues. So our view is that the structure that actually makes those authoritative decisions, namely the council, should also be reviewed from time to time. Reviewed, not necessarily changed. And while usually a change comes out of this, we found very few that are perfect along the way, but maybe a change is needed. And how severe that needs to be will depend again on what we find and what we believe might address that. And our role would be to say to council and the community ahead of time, we're thinking of doing this or this. You think that's going to make things any better or not? And the same with council. If we propose these changes, do you think your job can be handled better? Do you think the community will be better represented? And at the end, you weigh those up and make a call. I'm going to throw my joke in here too. We were doing a review in another municipality not long ago where we started with the idea that we were trying to encourage them to do a tune-up. Just do a little tune-up. And then we discovered, in fact, there were a lot of things that were really questionable. We suggest maybe you need a trade-in. Well, I don't know that we're going that far, but the point is you do a review. You keep your vehicle reviewed, serviced from time to time. Are we still working? What do we need to address? I like to think of that as an image of what's going on here. You don't necessarily make a change, but if you find something and the community realizes and agrees that there are things that need some adjustment, our role is to help you figure out what those might be.
Thanks, Bob. So if we move to the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit, not a ton, but just wanted to spend a couple of minutes just reviewing some of the population figures that we tend to look at and maybe highlight a couple of things that were, preliminarily seen based on population from ward to ward. So we're looking at an estimated 2023 population in Springwater right now of about 23,500. Like Bob said, I mean, things are changing so quickly that sitting here in almost mid 2024, I'm sure that's increased again with the annual population estimates. When we look at reflecting more on the census data, and we were looking over the last 10 years from 2011 to 2021, the municipality grew by about 19%. So to give a little bit of context to that, province of Ontario, Canada, grows at about 5 or 6% every census period. So about 1%, a little over 1% per year. So you basically grew at double the provincial and national rate over that 10-year period. And a big chunk of that in that last 5-year, 2016 to 21 period. So obviously very significant growth, very sustained growth. And when we look at population projections and housing projections going forward, it probably outstrips and again, a lot of that is based on economics and supply and all these different things we're talking about. But when we look at the forecast, if it's realized, it probably outstrips the growth that you've had over the last 5 or 10 years. So, big change has happened. Big change is expected to continue happening. When we look at the map in the middle, total population by ward, there's a couple of things. And so just quick legend, Ward 1, that lighter gray, less than 4,000 total population. Ward 4 at the bottom in that darker color, greater than 6,000 population. So right off the bat, I mean, without getting into too much detail, we see that there's two wards that have quite a bit of variance. And speaking about the Ontario Land Tribunal and the guiding principles regarding population parity, typically they want to see wards within about, usually better than this, but they'll wards within about 25% of the variance are typically acceptable. Again, like Bob said, assuming you're hitting those other guiding principles as well. So we know that before we do anything else, we know that there's some significant variance in a couple of wards here. The other thing is when we look at what population has changed over the last 10 years, this big increase I spoke about, well, a big chunk of that has been in Ward 4 as well. So again, it's getting worse, right? This variance that's occurring that's there already has gotten worse because of the growth over the last 10 years. And again, probably not a surprise to anyone in this room when we look at where's most of the growth going to happen and where are the large scale subdivisions, guess what? It's in Ward 4 as well. So we know, again, without, huge amounts of research and rocket science type calculations, that we have a population parity issue. Like Bob said, ultimately we're going to determine to what extent and how much is it affecting other wards, and is population decline in some wards also going to impact this variance. That's all the information we're going to provide to you over the next several months. But like I mentioned right off the bat, we know that there are some population parity issues, and based on what we know for growth, those issues are going to be exacerbated over time, not tempered. If we move to the next slide, a little bit of history that I think Bob already touched on, so I'll be quite brief about this. But when we think about, the municipality incorporated, became a township in 1994. Bob mentioned the current ward system was adjusted in 2013-14. But now, fast forward to 2024, a decade has gone by. And like I just talked about on the last slide, I mean, there's been a lot of change over that last decade. So I think this is really just trying to hammer home the point that Bob made, is that with this change, we want to ensure that the current electoral structure, current governance structure still makes sense for Springwater, not only today, reflecting that change, but is it also going to make sense knowing what we know about the next decade to come? The intention is to complete this ward boundary review. I think it's, and perhaps Renee, you can help me, is before the end of 2024. So I think Bob touched on this earlier, but you have to have a decision made no later than December 31st of 2025. So the end of the calendar year before the year of the election. We typically like to give even 6 months ahead of that, just to ensure that if there is an appeal, and we don't get appealed often, but if there is, we have ample room to deal with that. With your council, and your procedure will be done before this end of this calendar year. So you have an entire year should anything happen appeal wise to deal with it. So ample time to get this the study completed. Bob pointed out, important to mention, in 2019-20, so in between 13-14, when you made some changes to the boundary, and today the county did a review on composition. No changes were made as a result of that composition review. However, there may be changes, as we speak. I mean, the government is doing another review of counties and regions. We have no idea, honestly. I don't know if Bob has any inside information, but yeah, or if council does for that matter. But as far as we know, it's, for our review, it's going to be business as usual. It's not going to impact anything that we're doing. I mean, if something happens before we end this review, obviously we may have to pivot and come back to you. But as far as we're concerned, from here on in, it's going to be business as usual. And there's that very last point. Like I said, decision has to be made no later than December 31st, 2025. If a bylaw is passed before that, appeals are all dealt with. You have the authority then to use that that ward structure or council composition if there are changes for the 2026 election. So Next slide I want to touch on is Bob talked a little bit about this and started to mention a couple of places in Simcoe County, but I just want to talk a little bit about composition. And I think it's important for council to understand what Bob touched on, that there are no rules at all. There are no guiding factors when it comes to size of council. There's nothing that says for a certain population you should have at least this many. It's really what Bob mentioned, is that as long as you have that minimum of 5 and one is the mayor and they're elected at large, everything else is up to you. So, Bob said, like, if I showed you a chart of Ontario, there really is no rhyme or reason. There are gigantic councils with probably 10 or 15,000 population. There are really small councils with 100,000 population. It's really about what works for that individual municipality. And I got to say, for me, I actually like that there are no guidelines, because when you just make it about population, and Bob touched on this even with regard to the provincial and federal reviews, it's a population exercise. It's basically a computer exercise. But for us, we take in the unique aspects of each municipality, and that helps shape the wards. For composition, I think it's the same, right? We worked in a place, I don't want to name it, but had, I think, a council size of 12, really small place. And right off the bat, before we did any research, we thought, wow, that's a big council compared to other places in that area. But when we talked to council, it was a farming community. I think 3/4 of council were in the agriculture. Like, if they weren't farmers, they were in the agricultural field. And they said clearly to us, it's a time suck. Like, there's days and seasons where they just don't have the ability to answer to their constituents and, on a timely basis. So while the council seemed large, for that place, it really worked because of the uniqueness of that place. So again, when I look at this, sometimes, yeah, there is no rhyme or reason to it, but sometimes it really makes sense for that place. So that's really about this research phase, is learning about this place, and does your size of council make sense for Springwater? Just before we move off on that, I just did want to highlight a couple of places in Simcoe County, just to really, bring home that point about the really, is variance and there's no hard and fast rules. So when we look at it at the very top, some of the bigger places, New Tecumseh, biggest council in Simcoe County, 10. Also one of the larger populations at about 44,000 people. Then Bradford, West Gwillimbury, Innisfil, they're at 9, and also 2 of the bigger places around 43,000. So at the very top, from a population perspective, seems to make sense that you have the larger councils. But then after that, it really does go all over the place. Then you have, I think, another 3 councils that have 9 members. One is one of the smallest places at 10,000 population. One is Collingwood at 25,000. So right there, similar size council. Not dissimilar, some of these places, but 15,000 variance in population. Even when we look at your size council, so lots of 7s when we look at that list. But there's 6 others besides Springwater. But again, the variance is anywhere from 10,000 up to 25,000. So again, no hard and fast rules. And then even the 2 5s that Simcoe County has, that Bob mentioned, one, Bob was correct, is tiny, population around 12, 13,000. But the other one is ESSA, around 23, 24,000. So even at that minimum size, one, I would expect tiny to have a pretty small council size, but ESSA seems to work with that same size council as well. So just wanted to highlight some of those things, that once that conversation starts to happen a little bit more, you guys have a little bit of background and context to how you compare around Simcoe County, and really that there is no right number when we talk about what the right number is for council. The right number is, like I said, what works for Springwater, not, a comparison to other places in the county or the province. So finishing off some of our information today, getting to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about next steps. So today was really, like I said, an introductory workshop, a chance for you to hear a little bit from us, understand some of the things that we're going to be looking at. I really enjoy the guiding principles conversation because I think it really starts to highlight the different pushes and pulls that we're going to encounter. I did this presentation, a similar one in Innisfil last night, and they asked us to produce a population parity map that is largely a software GIS driven exercise by my tech team. And we can achieve population parity within hundreds from ward to ward to ward. But if you know Innisfil a little bit, to do that, the settlement area of Alcona was divided into 5 of the 7 wards. There were major settlement areas that were split into 2 or 3 wards because to make the population work from a parity perspective, the model had to grab, populations from the major centers and it had to like split them up to make it work. So we looked at this map and we're like, this is a joke. Like we would never come up with a ward boundary system that looked like that. But it helped hammer home what Bob was speaking about is that, yeah, we have to achieve population parity. We have to because the criteria says that. And if it gets appealed and we have wildly different populations, we're going to have an issue there. But it can't ever, it's never or rarely ever going to be perfect if we want to adhere to those other guiding principles as well. So that's really, I think, one of the most important parts of today was starting to understand kind of those different things that are going to arise as we work through this. And like I said, hopefully prepare counsel so that when Bob gets in touch with you and starts those one-on-one interviews, we have a little bit more information and awareness of the process. Next couple of things that we're going to focus on. So really the rest of this spring is continuing to learn about spring water. It's really that research and information collection phase. That's going to culminate with some public engagement. And the initial stage of public engagement is pretty freeform. It's we're not going to have recommendations or options yet. It's very similar to this conversation about learning from the public before we actually go and start to draw redesigns or think about different compositions of council. That's where the summer comes in. After that engagement process, we're basically hopefully going to have all the information that we need, and then we go off, we reflect on that, and we start to come up with different options for you with the intention that we come back in the fall. We have options that we're going to go out for our second round of public engagement, see what the public and council thinks about these options, and then ultimately come to you with a final report and final recommendation. And like Bob said, I mean, we've never come to council with one option. I mean, we don't want to come to you with 5 or 6, but we typically want to come with 2, sometimes 3. And often they're going to be what Bob mentioned. One may be more population parity heavy. One may be more community of interest heavy. One may be balancing the both. One may be looking at future population, and you may grow into population parity. So we're going to try to give you some different things to think about, but ultimately a couple of options to consider. And then, like Bob said, ultimately it's about providing you with enough information to make a decision for what you think is right for your council. Bob, do you want to just talk a little bit about the interviews and
All
next
right,
steps?
if I may, let me just pick up on a couple of those quick points too, though. The idea of more than one option is the sense that we don't make the decision, you do. You should have a choice as to not just take it or leave it. I mean, that would be, if you gave one option, it would be take it or leave it. We want to encourage you to think about different ways of getting to an effective representation system. So that will be part of that exercise. Anyway, the last slide is basically an anticipation of next Wednesday. And I know where I'm going, so I'll be on time. I do want to meet with each of you individually, and that has been set up. I sent a message to you roughly about what I wish to talk about, but there's some things that are better not just done on the spur of the moment, if I can put it that way. I'd like you to be thinking about some of these questions. They may not come quite directly the way they're written here, but what are the strongest attributes of the present wards? What do you think the wards do well for the community? Are they in fact successful? Do they successfully capture communities. We've already known there's going to be some soft aspects of the population numbers, but do they capture the communities well? And, you know, would we want to, how will we try to capture that? Or what are the weakest ones? Are there some communities that you're aware of? And maybe that's a broader term, community of interest. For example, is agriculture well represented the way the lines are drawn, or is agriculture sort of partly in one and partly in another, and it's not significant in either one of them, and therefore I'm not putting words in your mouth, but those are the kinds of things we want to think about. Does this serve all of those interests, whatever they are? And I'm going to rely on you to help me work out what those are, but are they well served by having the lines drawn the way they are? Again, we come back to guiding principles. We will be asking the community about these. We've given you a brief explanation now. I presume everyone will have a copy of this. So we'll have a list of those principles in the meantime. And I think they were in my letter too, but which of the ones do you think is a priority? Are there things that really should drive the exercise? For example, that growth factor, as we've already suggested. If you leave it alone, it's only going to get worse. And if your goal is to say, let's get out to parity, but maybe we can wait an election or so, then that would put that principle, give that principle a greater weight than trying to meet it right now. That's the kind of thing that I'd like to chat about in terms of how you see it. Not that it's going to be written down and used in a report or attributed to you. They are confidential in the sense that I'm talking one-on-one for my benefit. So if you can be thinking about that, that'd be great. And the flip side, of course, which is least important. Again, I'll be slightly tongue-in-cheek. Maybe population growth doesn't matter because you're going to want to do this again in a couple of elections. And you might say, let's just catch up and not worry about the growth, and we'll deal with growth when it happens. That's a legitimate, all of these are legitimate perspectives. It just helps us get a feel for how we go about trying to draw those lines and where you would come in on it. And then the last one is sort of circling back a little bit to the attributes. Are there areas of the township that appear to be underrepresented or overrepresented? There's a term that was used in one of the court decisions that related to it here had to do with diluting the vote. And if we look at the earlier chart, in some wards, it takes 6,000 people to elect one person, but for another part of the community, it only takes 3,000. So if you live in a ward with 6,000, your vote's diluted. You only get one person, whereas the other people can get one person and there's only half as many. Those are the kinds of things that lead to over or under representation. Again, I know it's population, but there may be other qualities and aspects in there that you are aware of that I wouldn't be, and I'd be happy to share that with you. And I think I'm back next Wednesday to do that. Okay, I'll stop there.
Great. So happy to take any questions or comments.
Great, thank you very much for that. And before I just do go to council, it was mentioned a couple times during the presentation that this was a compensation review and ward boundary. I just wanted to speak to the specific scope of this.
Composition. but
Oh,
not
composition?
compensation.
Okay, thank you.
And may I add something to that comes up in passing in a couple of places, primarily because of the Simcoe County review and the provincial review. We don't know at this point whether there might be a change to Simcoe County Council. And we know that the last discussions were to say, cut it from 32 to 16, which means your deputy mayor doesn't sit on county council. So the related question is, all right, what do we do with that office? Do we still keep a deputy mayor for valid reasons? In which case you don't change the number. But if there's some thought that maybe without that county role, you might say, okay, well, we could actually reduce the council. Then of course you become an even number, which has another dilemma. Or you redivide, or you have no deputy mayor and you add a ward councillor, for example. We hope we don't have to get into all of that juggle after we've gone through the process, but it's not front and center. We're going to assume that it's 5 wards, a mayor and a deputy mayor, and we'll work on that basis unless, as I said, somebody knows something that might change that.
Thank you for that. At this time, council will have a mover and seconder to get it on the floor and then open up for discussion. Moved by Councillor Fisher, seconded by Councillor Garwood, that the presentation from Watson and Associates regarding the 2024 boundary review, introduction to Council Worship be received. And at this time, we'll open it up for comments and questions. All right. Not seeing any. Deputy Cabral.
We're tied to the county, but there's a lot of single tier that do have mayor and deputy mayors.
Mhm.
So based on what you said, status quo going forward, that would kind of be where we would be, but would it be something that would be considered down the road if composition at county did change? Because I'm just kind of putting out there that there's lots of examples where they don't have, or they're upper tier all by themselves and still have a mayor and a deputy mayor to share the role when they have to. So just curious on that one.
If I
Okay.
may, Chair, it's back to some of those other points. There's no rules. You can do whatever the heck you want. You can have a deputy mayor, you can elect a deputy mayor at large, you can elect a deputy mayor from within council, you can change the deputy mayor every month. There are no rules about that. So I'm just suggesting that if the county makes a change, then you have some choices available without that role there. But if you don't want to touch it, that's fine. It is, as I said, something that varies considerably, and many municipalities don't have them. I mean, I'm being a little bit silly here in some ways, but if you look in the Municipal Act, the word mayor does not appear. There's a head of council, there's no mayor, and a deputy mayor is nowhere to be seen in the act as a role. It comes in a county context, or it comes in some local bylaws, but the office itself is only required in Springwater because of your county role. And if that changes, therefore whatever, but if it doesn't change, I suppose you could, I think if I read the act correctly, if you wanted to create another ward and select the deputy mayor from within the ward councilors, you're free to do that. Oro Medonte has done that based on a review we did for them last time. So there's some flexibility. Ideally, it would be great to have not so much guidance, but at least is this something that has no appeal at all? Or is something that, well, let's see what it might look like. I hope I'm not jinxing what we're talking about here. But it's a valid point that yeah, you can do it a couple of different ways, and it's part of the bigger question. If the number that you've got is workable, then there's slight combination changes that could happen. You can't change the mayor, but you can change the.
Thank you for that. Yesterday, County Council did vote to move forward with a workshop on the review of governance again this term. So this council, the current County Council, will be reviewing the structure as it is today. So not sure what comes out of that, but there seemed to be an appetite on the floor. So.
And I'm just flagging that it may ripple here depending on the timing of it, and that's the crucial part from the clerk's point of view. If nobody else has said we want to get this settled, but if something happens at the provincial level or even at the county level, we'll need to be prepared to adjust.
Thank you. Council, anything further? Not seeing anything. Thank you very much for the presentation. I think it gives us a good idea of where we're going, and looking forward to the interviews next week.
Thank you.
So council, we have the resolution has been moved and seconded, and there's no further comments or discussion. Council, all those in favor? And that has carried. And may I have a mover and seconder for the confirmation bylaw, please? Of Councillors Thompson and Moore, that bylaw 2024-032 to confirm and adopt the proceedings of council at the special meeting held on May 1st, 2024, listed herein, be signed and sealed by the mayor and clerk. All those in favor? That has carried. And finally, may I have a mover and seconder to adjourn the meeting, please? Of Councillor Moore and Deputy Cabral, that the special meeting of the Township of Springwater does now adjourn at 5:23 p.m. to meet again in regular meeting on May 1st, 2024 at 6:30 p.m. Thank you very much. All those in favor?